Hello, everybody, and welcome to the NBA Trade Zone podcast, where we talk all things NBA trades, past, present, and future. Hi, guys. My name is Daniel.
And I am Sebastian, and today we're going to continue our series of previewing the upcoming NBA season. We're taking a closer look at the Southwest Division from the Western Conference.
Yes, we are finally excited to be previewing the Western Conference, and this is a division with a lot of good teams and one what I believe to be is a pretty bad team, but we will discuss them more when we talk about the over-under and our win-loss prediction. So without further ado, let's jump right into the Memphis Grizzlies.
Yeah, so the Memphis Grizzlies last year's record was 22-60. It was an injury-plagued season where players such as Mike Conley and Chandler Parsons did not participate in any games. Actually, Mike Conley played at the start of the season, but then he got injured relatively quickly. They had a coaching change last year with Marc Gasol being very upset with the coach. This year Mike Conley is projected to be back. Before last year, they were a playoff team. They did play hard against the Spurs in the playoffs 2 years ago. So they were still a pretty good team. Vegas has them set for next year at 34.5. Obviously, the best players are a year older, but they did add Jaren Jackson with their draft pick, and they signed players such as Kyle Anderson. I'm actually going to bet the over on the 34.5 just because I do believe that the Memphis Grizzlies, when healthy, are a talented team, and I like the additions of both Jaren Jackson and Kyle Anderson, that this is going to be a pretty good defensive team, as they usually have been, and they'll be able to slug out a few victories.
Yeah, we're going to very much disagree over here. I don't know. I don't see too much at all from the Memphis Grizzlies. I actually have them down for 26 wins. I think Marc Gasol and Mike Conley will be gone, or at least one of them will be gone. Pretty early on in the year, I think Memphis, being in such a tough division and an even tougher conference, is really going to struggle to continue to prior to last season, they had a very good reputation, a very good tradition of winning, and I think that is basically over at this point. I don't see Mike Conley coming back and being as good as he was, and Marc Gasol did decline last year, and I see that going further this year. Again, like I said, I think one or both of them will be gone by the trade deadline, one probably earlier than the other, and I see them really struggling in the Western Conference to really grit it out every day. They might lose a lot of close games, but I do still see them losing a lot of games.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think I disagree with you a little bit. I think they're a veteran team that, besides injuries, and I just don't see them being ready to blow it up. I think signings such as the Kyle Anderson move kind of show that they do kind of want to compete in the NBA this year. And I think it'll be hard for this team to get a very high pick just because there's other much worse teams with less talent. So I do think that this team is going to be playing, at least trying to contend for a playoff spot. So I do see them winning a little bit more games. As a breakout player for this year, I do have their rookie draft pick, Jaren Jackson, who I believe is the obvious choice, for a few reasons, one being that this team doesn't have much young talent other than Jaren Jackson. So he is the player who is most ready to really show something. A lot of the scouts and the people who did the draft analysis did think that he might be the best or most talented player in this draft. He can block, he can rebound, he can stretch the floor with a jump shot. So I do think that he is the most player that's going to have the biggest chance of breaking out.
Yeah, I think Dylan Brooks might also be a pretty good breakout player this year. He had a sneaky solid rookie season last year, coming off as a second-round pick. So he's another player to look out for, and I think, especially if given the opportunity, I think he's a decent shooter, solid three-point shooter, and could control the ball a little bit. So I think he might be a player to look out for as well. But obviously, Jaren Jackson is the more obvious choice, and with good reason. And it should be interesting to see how he plays alongside Marc Gasol for however long they do play together. So it will be fun to watch him play in Memphis along the old guys there. So for a trade, and I think regardless of whether the Grizzlies rebuild or not during the season and whether they do trade off Conley and Gasol, I think a player for them to try to acquire is Andrew Wiggins, especially if they do rebuild. Now, the package I have going to Minnesota is, and again, this would have to happen midseason because Kyle Anderson just signed this year with the Grizzlies, but I have J. Michael Green, Kyle Anderson, and Garrett Temple as a salary filler. J. Michael Green is about 27, 28 now. A solid do-it-all player, but nothing more than a rotational player, as probably a solid starter, I should say, but could do it all, but doesn't really do anything great. But plays good defense and is still fairly young. Kyle Anderson is a similar type of player, a good defender, a little younger than J. Michael Green. She's a really good defender, but doesn't shoot the ball well and doesn't really stretch the floor for the Grizzlies as much as they probably like. And Garrett Temple is more of a salary filler. Now, Andrew Wiggins, again, this would be Minnesota probably saying, hey, we could get a couple of younger players to play alongside Karl Anthony Towns, two players who play good defense, and we get to get rid of Andrew Wiggins' contract. So there we go. How do you feel about this trade for the Memphis Grizzlies?
I mean, if it's the Memphis, it's a shot we're taking just because maybe Andrew Wiggins has not had such a good start to his career because of the position, the team he's been on. So maybe he hasn't been a good fit. He hasn't been coached well. If you're Minnesota, I don't think you would move on this deal just because you do seem to be giving out at least the most talented player with the most potential. We know exactly who Kyle Anderson is. We pretty much know exactly who Jim Michael Green is. Garrett Temple, like you said, is a salary filler. Andrew Wiggins still, and very low chances, and he does have a high contract, so I do agree with getting rid of that. If things were fine with Jimmy Butler and Jimmy Butler wanted to play there, then this would be a smart move in my opinion, just because, it would give you some role players who play some defense, who would fit the motto of Jimmy Butler. But since he wants out, I do think that you have to kind of not give up on Andrew Wiggins yet, even though, I don't have high hope for him at all.
Yeah, they're kind of in a tough position right now because they need another superstar around Karl Anthony Towns. Now, they have time, especially with him signing this extension. They have essentially 4 years to try to either develop Andrew Wiggins into that star or get another star. But that problem is, with Jimmy Butler being traded, you're probably not going to receive anyone with star potential. Now, you'll probably receive a couple of young players who could play. But similarly, as you would in this deal for Andrew Wiggins, but these are not any guys that would star potential, and that's what you need around Karl Anthony Towns. Well, at the very least, they would have time to get that player to Minnesota, and preferably two of those players, but let's start with one.
All right, so we are going to move on to our next team, which is going to be the Dallas Mavericks. The Dallas Mavericks did not make the playoffs last year. They went 24-58. And this year, Vegas has their odds at 34.5. Here, I am going to bet the under. The Dallas Mavericks did make some additions with, of course, they traded up a little bit to get Luka Doncic, but they did give up their pick next year's draft pick, which I do think is a smart move. I am all in on Luka Doncic. I believe he's the best player in this draft. But I don't think he's going to, change the game where they're going to be a much better team than they were last year. They did add the center from the Clippers, DeAndre Jordan. But, I don't think he's much of a game changer. I do think this team might win a little bit more games. I don't see them winning more than 10 games if they win than last year. So I would bet them on the under.
Yeah, I have their win total set at 30 for this upcoming year. And that's more of the fact that they play in the Western Conference. And they play in a tough division. It's probably the worst division in the conference. But it's a real tough division. So it's just really hard to see them. I could probably see them playing a lot of close games, but not being able to pull it out at the end. There's just way too many good teams in the Western Conference. And DeAndre Jordan is getting up there in age. He is not as productive. Especially his last year was not as productive as he had been before. Obviously, Dirk Nowitzki is essentially 1 year away from being out of the league. Harrison Barnes hasn't turned into a superstar like Dallas had hoped and paid him for. And Dennis Smith Jr. and Luka Doncic are still both very young. Now, those two players are very high breakout candidates for this year, and both of them could prove to be an extremely solid tandem as early as this year. But that's a statement I'm making. It's a bold statement because it's hard to see both of those players becoming that very good tandem quite this early.
Yeah, I mean, again, as my breakout player, obviously my choice was between the two, Luka Doncic or Dennis Smith Jr. I do think that Dennis Smith Jr. maybe overperformed a little bit last year. Obviously, with an area where he needs to improve on mostly is his shooting. Again, I said it before, I'm all in on Luka Doncic. I think this guy's going to be a star. So I would say he's the breakout player just because of the talent. No one has been more NBA ready coming out of, winning EuroLeague MVP than him, which I do think matters, and that is a much more challenging league than college basketball. So I think Luka's ready, and I think Luka's going to be a really good player. I think this is his breakout year.
Yeah, I'm very interested to see what Luka does. I could see Luka either struggling to adjust to the NBA game or coming out and looking very fluid. So he's going to be a very interesting player to watch. He's going to be one of the more polarizing athletes this year because of the fact of that he could really be really good and really adjust to the NBA very well, or struggle a little bit with adjusting to the league. So moving on to the trade. Now, for Dallas Mavericks, I think there are either two options because I feel if they're competing for the playoffs, they have an expiring contract in Wesley Matthews that they could use to bring on a player like Trevor Ariza. So the trade I am going to propose, the first trade I'm going to propose for them is Wesley Matthews and Yogi Ferrell for Dragan Bender and Trevor Ariza. Now, the Suns would begin a point guard here in Yogi Ferrell that they need. He's still a young player and a solid point guard, solid backup point guard at the very least, but he's a solid shooter, could shoot the three. So that's something that Phoenix needs, and Dragan Bender has been a bust at this point. And essentially, swapping out Wesley Matthews and Trevor Ariza is like swapping out two different contracts. I mean, Trevor Ariza, again, I feel makes no sense for Phoenix. Wesley Matthews is not as good of a player, but he's still a solid player who could shoot and play some D. So essentially, they begin a point guard here, trading away one of their draft that's seemingly looking to be a bust. I mean, he's got more potential than Marquise Chris, but again, he hasn't proven anything. So Dallas would be acquiring here Trevor Ariza to make a playoff push for at least the 7th or 8th seed, and acquiring a player in Dragan Bender who could potentially replace Dirk Nowitzki, nowhere near his level, but potentially replace him in the starting lineup. And the second trade I am going to propose here is Harrison Barnes, Yogi Ferrell, and Dwight Powell going to Orlando for Aaron Gordon. Now, this would be more if Orlando's experiment with Aaron Gordon at the 3 didn't work out, and Jonathan Isaac and Bamba are playing well at the 4 and the 5. Now you could make Aaron Gordon expendable, get in Harrison Barnes, who's a small forward. Now he's a little older and not as productive as Aaron Gordon, but still a solid player. And you'd begin 2 younger players in Yogi Ferrell and Dwight Powell, who are solid rotational players.
I mean, so the Trevor Ariza trade, I think, only makes sense for Dallas. I mean, I guess it doesn't hurt them, but they would only really do it if they are trying to win and make a playoff push, which of course I don't think is the case. But yeah, if you do that, I mean, Trevor Ariza is a good playoff player. He has experience. He plays defense, and he can hit the 3. He's definitely more apt to guard in the West more than Wesley Matthews. When it comes to the Aaron Gordon trade, I do think Dallas would win that trade because Aaron Gordon is probably the best player in that trade. I mean, I guess some people can argue it's Harrison Barnes. I would disagree. It'd be interesting. The Magic would probably want a different package if they do want to have to deal Aaron Gordon, just because you're not getting much potential in that deal. I mean, Harrison Barnes is a young player, but we pretty much know what he has done, what he can and cannot do. So I think if you are the Magic, you would be looking to get something else in that deal.
Yeah, and you might be able to swap out Yogi Ferrell and Dwight Powell for a first-round pick in 2021, because now that they gave away their pick next year to Atlanta, you can't trade away your pick in 2020. So maybe offer up a first-round pick in 2021 and see if Orlando bites on that. But I think it'd be very interesting to see Aaron Gordon in Dallas alongside Dennis Smith Jr. and Luke